Hey everyone, I'm Taylor with the Beta Angel Project, and today I'm going to be going over the Beta Angel Project's top 10 favorite climbing research papers from 2023. I'm still kind of working through all of the research and just finished updating quite a number of papers from 2023, and so I figured I'd go over my top 10. Um, just so you're aware, I'll be going over this is going to be like real fast. It's going to be 10 papers in hopefully around 10 minutes. And I am going to be not necessarily using my research side of my brain, which looks at things like methods, results, that sort of thing. I'm going to be using more of the strategist side of my brain, where I attempt to kind of like show what questions does this raise for me from a performance standpoint. How can we take advantage of this, that sort of thing. So first paper we're going to go over is by Beltran. It's titled Climbing Technique Evaluation by Skeleton Video Stream Analysis. And the hook here was basically, at least for me, was what if some technique errors aren't actually errors? So they built a computer system that identified, I think it was 6 technical errors in beginner climbers. And what I immediately started thinking of is, when are those errors like important and at what level? So some errors may not necessarily be might not actually be errors at all when you start to get to more advanced climbing. So I thought this was kind of interesting. I think you'll have to, if you want to read around this topic, and I always end up having to stop a little bit and kind of like go off to a new paper, usually 1 to more papers, just to learn about the whatever paper I'm reading. You can look at something recent, which is a paper by Dech and Kittel, which just came out in 2026. I think that one looked at biomechanics, and then a more dated model, which talked to a lot of coaches. I think it was in the UK, about their conception of technique, was by Taylor, Giles, and Mitchell. So if you're interested in those, I'll have links, or I'll mention those in the comment section of YouTube. The second and actually third paper I want to go over is a paper by Langer et al. And so that's number 2 right there. But I also want to kind of combine it with number 6 on here, which is by Winkler et al. And both of these papers were pretty interesting. The Langer paper is a systematic review. The Winkler paper is more of a performance model that looked at several different performance factors like strength, endurance, flexibility, power, that sort of thing, to see what impacted climbing performance across disciplines. And so I think what was interesting about this paper is, or both of these papers, is they both talk quite a bit about constraining climbing. So in other words, like how much should you be constraining climbing when measuring strengths and weaknesses? Is it better to constrain, or better to allow the climber to sort of compensate in certain ways? And I think this question goes just significantly broader to climbing in general. Is are we always looking for ways to compensate, or are we always trying to kind of like shore up our weaknesses? I thought this is fantastic. If you need to read a little bit more about this, there's a lot on you should probably read up on reliability and validity, and how those are taken into account in research, and also more on climbing specific testing. Quite a bit of reviews have come out in the last couple of years on testing. The next paper I'm going to go over is by Walsh et al. It's the effect of fatigue on climbing fluidity and hand movements. Now, this one was kind of interesting because it's kind of surprised me a little bit. The thing I want you to remember about this paper is that fatigue made climbers fall more, but it didn't necessarily make them more messy in terms of their movement. So basically, if they're pre-fatiguing the climber is going to fall, but you may not necessarily be able to visually see them starting to look as if they're becoming more inefficient with their movement. So you might have to learn a little bit about how fluidity is measured. Fluidity is a really interesting concept. It's a little bit like efficiency, but instead of measuring essentially the cost on the climber internally, you're measuring sort of visually how smooth the climber essentially looks. And so I highly recommend a lot of the papers by, say, like Ludovic Seifert, Dominic Orth, and you will be able to learn quite a bit about this concept. Next paper I want to go over is by Himaluska et al. And that one's on essentially the accuracy of resting metabolic rate prediction equations in climbers. And the hook here is that we may be underestimating climber calorie needs before we even add the exercise component. So the RMR side of things, the resting metabolic rate comes earlier in the equation, and so we need to ensure that we are looking at a climber population. A lot of those equations were done without climbers in mind. And so if we just take this into mind, especially nutritionists or yourself, if you're actually trying to use some of these equations, just keep in mind that it might be under predicting what you should be eating. Next paper I want to go over is by Garrido, Palomino, and Espana Romero. That's number 5 on here. This is on the fear of falling, but I really think that this also could be taken into account with respect to anxiety, just in general, or performance anxiety when it comes to a competition or getting on a route or anything like that. Um, I really love this paper because it uh, talks a lot about the relationship between awareness uh, and sports psychology, specifically like self-regulation as well as goal setting. And so the thing to remember about this is maybe dealing with fear uh, is getting better. Maybe the approach to dealing with fear is getting better at reading yourself and your emotions. And so they actually did an intervention, and they had the climbers essentially try to read themselves in terms of their own emotion, their awareness of anxiety, fear, emotion, and then self-regulate using sports psychology skills as well as using goal setting. And I think all of these things can help, and you essentially the kind of like the train of thought here is you notice what's happening, you understand it, you regulate it, then you keep climbing. You might want to learn more about self-regulation just in general, things like self-efficacy, different types of sports psychology tools such as breath work or visualization. Um, Super interesting paper. The next paper, as I said, we're going to skip over number 6. It's by Winkler. We're going to go directly to Gibson, Smith, et al.'s nutrition knowledge paper. And this one was pretty interesting because it's pretty specific. The thing to remember about this is that about a third of this entire sample had intentionally cut weight and used at least one concerning method to do it. Put another way, they essentially found that 16 climbers, like 21 climbers, were intentionally cutting weight for a comp, and of those 21, 16, so three quarters, were using some kind of concerning practice to cut weight. So this isn't about is climbing a strength weight sport. Should you be should you be cutting weight for climbing? This is about how you do it. So I encourage you to take a look at this paper, if only to see how they defined concerning practices regarding cutting weight. The next paper I'm going to go over is by Michaela et al. And this one's time management and World Cup bouldering finals. So the thing I want you to remember about this is different types of climbs change how elite climbers spend their time, specifically with respect to work to rest ratios. So a slab climb versus say like a steep climb, a coordination climb versus say a power boulder. There's some actually really interesting um, not research, but some interesting categories that World Climbing has come up with respect to their 4 main boulder problems. I think they did that for one of the Olympics. I forget which one, but that was pretty interesting. So the point is that work to rest ratios should be different, and we should know a little bit more about that. So read McKellar if you're interested in that. Next paper, number 9, is on H taping by Salas et al. And I'm not going to get into whether or not H-taping works. If you don't know what H-taping is, you can probably Google it. There's probably a ton of YouTube videos on it, pictures, that kind of thing. And the point is that it's supposed to support the pulleys, and such as when you get an injury. Now, the thing I like about this paper is that it really starts to dive into, do you use H taping, or and they don't talk about something called a pulley ring or a pulley orthosis, but it might apply. The concept might apply to that. Um, do you just use it H taping when when you've been injured and you are trying to get better? No loading, no climbing. Do you use it when you're not injured and you're trying to ensure that you don't get injured? Do you use it and then load a little bit, but not climb? Do you use it, load, and climb? All of these questions popped up for me, and I encourage you to read this paper to get a sense of how you should answer this question for yourselves. The last paper is by Barchi et al., and it's on the Palmer shift in youth climbers. Palmer shift. This is a term I had not heard before, but it's essentially on. It's referring to what happens in a growth in a growth plate fracture, or just in general in a climber's fingers. When you are concerned about a growth plate fracture. So the thing to remember about this is that crimping changes how a young climber's finger joint lines up under load. And so they basically looked at the different grip types and how much one bone shifts in relation to another bone based upon the grip type, and found that crimping was pretty significantly higher than other types of grip types like open hand, or if I remember correctly, it was basically different types of crimping plus open hand. If you want to read something about this, I really encourage you to learn about peak height velocity. So essentially, if you are concerned at all about a youth climber's growth plates, well, one of the ways that you can figure out whether they're in the period during which they might be most susceptible is to measure peak height velocity. This is something I encourage you to read about. Also encourage you to read about more about growth plates, especially if you've never heard that growth plates are a concerning factor in youth climbing. So that was our 10 papers. I have no idea how long this was. I hope you got something out of it. Like I said, this is more about like my reflections on some of these papers. Encourage you to read them. On the right-hand side over here is the inventory category. Go to beta-angel.com, click on the research inventory, and then you should be able to find little short summaries of each of these papers, as well as links if it's open source in the different sections. So like the Beltran paper will be in the technical section, or the Langer paper will be under anthropometry. So, have a great day and keep climbing.